My name is Melanie Gomez, and I am 31 years old. 2 weeks ago, I sat in the most exclusive seafood restaurant in Anchorage, Alaska, paying for a dinner that was supposed to celebrate my promotion to senior logistics auditor. Instead, my father stood up, raised his crystal glass, and spent 20 minutes delivering a glowing toast to my younger brother Derek, praising his brilliant mind and his lucrative career as a finance executive. He never even mentioned my name. I sat in silence, tracing the rim of my water glass, calculating the cost of the imported king crab my family was devouring on my dime. But the real shock came when a distinguished man at the adjacent table pushed his chair back and stared at our waiter. He stared right at my golden child brother holding a pitcher of ice water. The man chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. He said, "I did not expect to see you here, Derek, especially after I fired you this morning for falsifying client tax returns, picking up a serving shift to make rent." Before I share exactly how I used my corporate access to legally strip my family of every dime they owned, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to Grape Echo Stories. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from tonight. The air inside the private dining room tasted like melted butter and expensive cedar, but it felt heavy enough to crush bone. I had spent 5 years climbing the corporate ladder at Alaska top oil extraction conglomerate, securing a senior position that demanded ruthless precision. I thought tonight would be the night my parents finally acknowledged my existence. Instead, Victor, my father, adjusted his tailored suit jacket and projected his booming voice across the table, ensuring the neighboring patrons heard every word of his fabricated pride. To Derek, he beamed, holding up a flute of vintage champagne. "The youngest and brightest financial mind in Anchorage. We always knew you were destined for greatness, son." Derek sat across from me, flashing a perfect, practiced smile. He wore a crisp white shirt that looked identical to the restaurant uniform. He accepted the praise without flinching. My mother, Valerie, reached over and patted his hand, her diamond rings catching the ambient light. They were so consumed by their own performance, they ignored the quiet interaction happening right beside them. I watched our actual waiter approach to refill my glass. He looked exhausted. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my father discreetly slipping his premium credit card to the server for the first round of drinks. The server swiped it on a handheld terminal, frowned, and shook his head. Declined. My father snatched the card back, his jaw tightening, and quickly handed over a different piece of plastic. He shot a frantic warning look at the server. My analytical instincts flared. My parents lived in a pristine multi-million-dollar eco-cabin near Denali. A declined card on a Tuesday night made zero logical sense. Then, Elias Thorne stood up from the adjacent booth. He was a recognized titan in the local investment sector. Elias wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and locked eyes with my brother. The polite hum of the restaurant faded into a chilling vacuum. "Derek Thorne," said his voice, slicing through the dining room. "Falsifying ledgers is a federal offense. I told security to escort you off my property at 9 this morning. I must admit I did not expect to find you wearing an apron and pouring water just 10 hours later." Derek dropped his fork. It hit his china plate with a sharp, ringing clatter. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ash gray. He looked at Elias, then at our parents, his chest rising and falling in erratic, panicked jerks. He was no longer a wealthy executive. He was a disgraced clerk caught playing dress-up. My hands rested evenly on the white tablecloth. I did not shed a single tear for my humiliated brother. Instead, I felt a cold, calculated focus take root in my mind. The golden child was a fraud, and I was going to find out exactly how much he had stolen. The drive back to my cabin was a study in sensory deprivation. The Anchorage roads were slick with black ice. The towering silhouettes of the Chugach Mountains loomed in the distance, cutting a jagged, dark line across the starlit sky. The heater in my vehicle blasted warm air, but I felt nothing but a sharp glacial focus settling deep into my bones. Just an hour prior, my brother had stumbled backward in the restaurant, his shoulder catching the edge of a mahogany serving cart. A stack of polished silverware clattered to the floor, piercing the stunned silence of the room. Derek opened his mouth, but the smooth, confident cadence of the supposed finance titan was gone. He stammered out a pathetic string of fragmented excuses, claiming Elias Thorne was a disgruntled former boss suffering from a severe cognitive decline. He insisted the confrontation was a simple case of mistaken identity. Victor did not pause to consider the logic of a prominent chief executive randomly harassing a waiter. My father stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair tipped backward. He puffed out his chest, marching directly into Elias' personal space. Victor pointed a thick finger at the older man, roaring that his son was an untouchable prodigy. He threatened to call the restaurant owner and demand a formal written apology for the slander. Elias did not flinch. The seasoned investor simply adjusted his tailored overcoat, offered a look of profound pity, and walked out the front doors into the freezing Alaskan night. The bubble of their perfect illusion had just been punctured, but my mother Valerie immediately rushed to seal the breach. She turned her panicked gaze toward me. Her perfectly manicured fingers reached across the white tablecloth, gripping my wrist with a desperate, painful urgency. The maitre d' approached our table holding a black leather billfold containing the $2,000 check for the imported crab and vintage champagne. Valerie leaned in close, her perfume thick and cloying. "Melanie, pay the man. Right now," Valerie hissed, her voice a tight, frantic whisper. "Do not just sit there staring. Your brother is under immense stress, and this entire ordeal is ruining the evening. You just got a promotion, so hand over your card and fix this before anyone else stares at us." I looked down at her manicured hand digging into my skin. For a fraction of a second, the sheer weight of 30 years of conditioning threatened to pull me under. My mind instantly flashed back to a freezing December morning when I was 12 years old. Derek had stolen the keys to our father's prized snowmobile, taking it for a joyride across the icy tundra behind our old house. He lost control and crashed the machine straight into a towering pine tree, shattering the front chassis. When Victor stormed out of the house, livid and demanding answers, Valerie had pulled me aside into the laundry room. She told me to take the blame. She said Derek had a crucial hockey tournament approaching and could not risk a punishment. She told me I was strong enough to handle the disappointment, while Derek needed to be protected. I took the fall that day. I accepted the grounding, the yelling, and the profound shame. But as I stared at the $2,000 bill resting on the pristine tablecloth, the invisible chains of that lifelong conditioning snapped. The metallic sound of the broken link echoed loud and clear in my mind. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear over their profound betrayal. I reached into my purse, withdrew my corporate credit card, and handed it to the waiter. I signed the receipt, stood up from the table, and walked out of the restaurant without saying a single word to the 3 strangers sitting behind me. Now safely parked in the snow-covered driveway of my secluded property, I prepared to work. The cabin was heavily insulated, built to withstand the brutal winter temperatures. I unlocked the heavy steel deadbolt, stepped inside, and tossed my coat onto a nearby chair. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my home office. The room was illuminated only by the pale blue glow of my dual monitors. As a senior logistics auditor for a premier oil extraction firm, my job required hunting down missing capital across complex international supply chains. I traced hidden funds for a living. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and cracked my knuckles. The silence of the remote wilderness surrounded me, providing the perfect environment for a digital autopsy. I logged into my secure encrypted workstation. I opened a proprietary database normally reserved for tracking offshore oil shipments and redirected the search parameters toward a much more personal target. I typed my brother's legal name into the search bar, cross-referencing his social security number with local corporate registries and federal tax filings. I expected to find a trail of unpaid credit cards or perhaps a string of defaulted auto loans. The arrogant golden child was always trying to fund a lifestyle he had not earned. But when the raw data populated across my secondary screen, the numbers painted a picture far more sinister than simple financial incompetence. Derek had not just been fired for cutting corners. The system revealed a staggering network of temporary holding accounts linked to his former employment profile. I engaged a deep dive algorithm tracing the origins of the funds flowing through those hidden accounts. The capital did not belong to the investment firm itself. The money was being systematically siphoned directly from the private portfolios of high net worth clients. I scanned the names of the victims listed in the pending compliance flags. My breath hitched in my chest. The victims were top-tier executives in the Alaskan oil industry. These were the exact same men and women who governed the commercial drilling contracts and extraction leases that funded the entire state economy. Derek was not a low-level clerk making clerical errors. He was an active predator running an embezzlement scheme targeting the most powerful figures in our region. The digital paper trail showed dozens of illicit transfers. He moved funds in calculated batches, keeping the amounts just below the standard federal reporting thresholds. He routed the stolen capital through a maze of dummy corporations registered in Delaware, attempting to wash the digital fingerprints clean before the money landed back in his own personal checking accounts. I leaned back in my chair, the cool leather pressing against my spine. Elias Thorne had not simply fired my brother. The investment firm chief executive was undoubtedly compiling a comprehensive report to hand directly over to federal prosecutors. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were inevitably circling Derek. The domestic dinner theater I had just witnessed was not a simple family squabble. It was the prologue to a high-stakes federal indictment. My mind mapped out the trajectory of the impending disaster with ruthless clarity. Victor and Valerie would never accept the truth. Their entire social identity was anchored to the illusion of Derek's triumphant success. When the federal authorities eventually knocked on their door with arrest warrants, my parents would not step aside. They would blindly attempt to shield him. They would lie, they would hide assets, and they would expect me to finance his criminal defense. I opened a new heavily encrypted digital folder on my desktop. I named the file using a random sequence of alphanumeric characters. I began exploring the bank routing numbers, the shell company registration documents, and the flagged transaction histories. Every single piece of damning evidence was meticulously organized into this digital red binder. I tabbed the files chronologically, building an ironclad roadmap of his illegal activity. The chilling reality of my situation crystallized. Derek had spent his entire life taking whatever he wanted because he knew my parents would force me to absorb the consequences. If I confronted them with this data, they would demand I use my own lucrative salary and my pristine corporate reputation to bail him out. They would beg me to cover his stolen funds to keep him out of a prison cell. And if I refused, they would try to drag me down into the abyss with him. I stared at the glowing monitors, understanding the true cost of making the wrong choice. Silence was no longer an option. Compliance meant signing my own professional death warrant. My brother had initiated a catastrophic financial war, and I was holding the exact blueprint of his destruction. I saved the final document to my secure offline drive, knowing the real investigation had only just begun. Every predator leaves a trail. I just needed to find the specific thread that would unravel his entire world before he could reach mine. The pale blue light of my dual monitors cast long, jagged shadows across the timber walls of my cabin. Outside, the wind howled down from the icy Chugach peaks, rattling the heavy reinforced window panes. Inside, the silence carried a tangible, suffocating weight. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp sound echoing in the stillness, and typed another string of complex command codes into the secure terminal. Forensic auditing is a sterile, unforgiving art. It requires stripping away all human sentiment to observe the raw architecture of greed. Numbers possess a unique honesty that people lack. I peeled back the encrypted layers of my brother's online footprint, hunting for the exact mechanism he used to drain those prominent oil executives. The primary holding accounts Elias Thorne had likely flagged were merely a superficial facade. Beneath them lay a dark, sophisticated labyrinth of corporate entities registered in Delaware. These were phantom firms existing solely as a string of digital code on a server farm thousands of miles away. They carried names specifically designed to sound established and legitimate, like Apex Northern Holdings and Summit Regional Capital. I traced the routing algorithms, watching the data populate across my secondary screen. Derek moved the stolen funds through these phantom corporations, using fractional transfers to evade standard reporting protocols. He operated like a calculated parasite, draining his wealthy host a few drops at a time to avoid triggering an institutional alarm. I followed the outbound capital stream, determined to see exactly where the stolen cash eventually surfaced. A specific recurring debit caught my eye, flashing a vivid red warning on my spreadsheet. $5,000 exited the primary Delaware shell entity on the first of every single month, routing directly to the Glacier Point Winter Club. It was the most elite winter sports country club in Anchorage, a place where memberships required steep initiation fees and unyielding social pedigree. My jaw tightened. While I worked grueling 60-hour weeks analyzing hazardous supply chain logistics to earn my senior auditor title, Derek was using stolen oil wealth to fund his pristine social image. He bought access to private ski lifts and exclusive dining rooms, ensuring his former pageant queen wife Paige could rub shoulders with the Alaskan elite. They sipped vintage champagne and posed for glossy photographs while secretly feeding off the lifeblood of defrauded clients. My parents encouraged this extravagant facade. Valerie always defended Derek, claiming he needed to spend heavy capital to make money in the high-stakes finance world. She praised his country club connections, insisting he was securing the family legacy. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. He was not securing a legacy. He was actively financing his own federal indictment. I pushed the country club receipts aside and dug further into the commercial expenditures of his primary shell company. I needed to map every single outbound wire before the federal agent seized his former employer's servers. As I cross-referenced the vendor payment logs, my eyes locked onto a distinct sequence of alphanumeric codes. The breath caught sharply in my throat. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my heart hammering a sudden frantic rhythm against my ribs. The billing code belonged to an external logistics vendor contract. It was a local transport firm specializing in moving heavy drilling equipment across the frozen tundra to remote oil extraction sites. But this specific vendor was not an independent contractor. The routing data tied the transport firm directly back to Derek Delaware Shell Network. He owned the vendor outright. The true horror settled over my shoulders like a weighted blanket when I pulled the original authorization file for that specific transport contract. A digitized signature rested cleanly at the bottom of the security clearance form. It was my signature. My mind raced back 8 months. Derek had visited my corporate office bringing expensive coffee and flashing his trademark charming smile. He told me a friend of his was starting a small logistics company and needed an initial clearance to bid on minor transport routes for my oil conglomerate. He asked me to co-sign the vendor approval, citing his friend's lack of corporate history. I was focused on a brutal quarterly review, buried under a mountain of supply chain manifests. I trusted my brother. I scanned the document and signed the approval without conducting a deep dive into the vendor ownership structure. He had orchestrated the entire interaction with chilling precision. Derek did not just steal from high-net-worth executives. He used that dummy logistics vendor to submit falsified invoices to my elite oil conglomerate, laundering his stolen cash through the very corporation I worked for. And he used my pristine security clearance to open the heavy steel doors. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to the chest. He intentionally tied his illicit financial web to my hard-earned career. He knew the federal authorities would eventually uncover his offshore routing schemes. When the investigators tore through his records, they would find a direct, verified link to a senior logistics auditor. He engineered the paperwork to make it look like I was the internal architect of his money laundering ring. I was his designated blast shield. He planned to offer me up to the authorities to buy himself a reduced sentence when the walls finally closed in. Any lingering trace of sisterly affection evaporated into the freezing Alaskan night. Fighting this magnitude of betrayal with tears or emotional pleas was entirely useless. Narcissists do not respond to hurt feelings. They only respond to superior leverage. I opened my encrypted red binder of the digital guillotine I was slowly building on my desktop. I dragged the forged vendor contracts and the shell company routing logs into the secure folder. This was no longer just a family dispute over a ruined celebration. This was a brutal, high-stakes war for my professional survival. My brother intended to send me to a federal penitentiary to save his own skin. He viewed me as a disposable pawn in his game of fake wealth. I stared at the blinking cursor on my monitor, feeling a dangerous, cold serenity wash over me. I needed to sever his parasitic grip before the federal agents kicked down his door. I needed to gather enough irrefutable data to direct the impending legal storm squarely onto his shoulders while insulating my own corporate fortress. I began writing a complex tracing algorithm that would automatically flag any new transactions associated with his shell network. I built a digital perimeter around my own accounts, locking down my assets with multi-factor authentication protocols. I saved the final batch of decrypted files and closed the database just as my phone buzzed on the wooden desk. A text message illuminated the dark room. It was Derek. The message contained no apologies for the disastrous dinner or the public humiliation he suffered at the restaurant. Instead, his text read that his wife Paige was going shopping tomorrow for a luxury winter gala, and he urgently needed me to transfer a substantial amount of cash to cover a temporary banking error. He was drowning. His accounts were likely frozen by Elias Thorne, and he was turning his predatory gaze toward my new promotion salary. The next phase of his desperation was beginning, and I was ready to watch him dig his own grave. The illusion of untouchable wealth requires constant, expensive maintenance. While I spent the ensuing days structuring a digital fortress around my own bank accounts, my brother faced the terrifying reality of a dry well. Elias Thorne had acted with lethal swiftness. The morning after the restaurant incident, the investment firm deactivated Derek's secure login credentials, confiscated his corporate cards, and placed a hard freeze on his commission portfolio. Derek was locked out of the very system he used to fund his extravagant charade. But his wife remained entirely unaware of the incoming storm. Paige grew up chasing pageant crowns across the Pacific Northwest, eventually securing a runner-up sash that defined her entire personality. She viewed marriage to an Anchorage finance executive as an endless, unlimited line of credit. In her mind, a minor inconvenience or a quiet weekend was a valid excuse for extreme retail therapy. Oblivious to her husband staring at locked banking portals, Paige embarked on a staggering spending spree to soothe her seasonal boredom. She visited a premium outdoor dealership and purchased 2 top-tier customized snowmobiles intended for winter weekend getaways. She did not stop there. The next afternoon, she walked into a boutique jeweler downtown and swiped a joint card for a $30,000 custom diamond teardrop necklace. Derek received the frantic overdraft alerts on his phone while sitting in his home office. The offshore routing accounts were frozen. The dummy corporations were flagged. The stolen oil funds he usually relied upon to cover his wife's exorbitant habits were unreachable. Instead of confessing the truth to Paige and stopping the purchases, he chose the path of a desperate coward. He turned to the shadows. To cover the negative balances and maintain his flawless facade, Derek sought out predatory high-interest personal loans. He bypassed legitimate banking institutions because any standard credit check would immediately red flag his recent termination. He logged into unregulated lending portals, signing digital contracts that carried exorbitant interest rates and crippling penalties. He mortgaged his non-existent future just to keep the diamonds around his wife's neck and the truth hidden from her eyes. The fallout from this reckless desperation bled directly into our mandatory Sunday family brunch. My parents hosted the gathering at their sprawling Anchorage estate. The scent of roasted salmon and fresh sourdough filled the vaulted dining room, projecting an atmosphere of warm domestic bliss. It was a suffocating theater performance, and we were all expected to play our assigned roles perfectly. I arrived wearing a simple, tailored wool sweater, choosing to observe rather than participate. Paige sat at the center of the dining table, holding court. She wore the $30,000 teardrop necklace resting prominently against her collarbone. The diamonds caught the light of the overhead chandelier, flashing a brilliant, blinding reminder of my brother's felony theft. Paige took a delicate sip of her mimosa and turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes carried a familiar, condescending gleam. She loved highlighting the perceived disparity between her glamorous existence and my practical career. "Melanie, you look so exhausted," Paige noted, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "All those long hours at the oil company must be draining you. I simply cannot imagine sitting behind a desk staring at boring spreadsheets all day. It feels so blue-collar. You really should let Derek give you some investment advice. You might actually afford to take a real vacation instead of just working yourself to the bone." My father chuckled from the head of the table, raising his coffee mug in agreement. "Your sister-in-law is right, Melanie. You lack a certain visionary spirit. Derek knows how to leverage capital to enjoy life. You just hoard yours in savings accounts." I looked at the sparkling stones resting on Paige's chest. I did not argue, I did not defend my promotion, or explain the rigorous demands of a senior logistics auditor. My mind simply calculated the exact federal sentencing guidelines for purchasing luxury goods with laundered corporate funds. Paige was sitting in my parents' dining room, proudly displaying the very evidence that would soon authorize a government seizure of her entire life. "I am quite comfortable with my career path," I replied, offering a cool, emotionless smile. "I prefer the security of knowing exactly where every single dollar comes from." Derek dropped his fork. The metal clattered loudly against the fine china. He stared at me, his face pale and slick with a thin layer of nervous sweat. He recognized the subtle, lethal undertone in my voice. He knew I possessed the analytical skills to untangle his financial web, and my serene demeanor terrified him. He abruptly excused himself from the table, claiming he needed to take an urgent business call. 10 minutes later, I excused myself to retrieve my coat from the hallway closet. The house was quiet in the corridors, far away from the echoing laughter of the dining room. As I reached for my jacket, a heavy hand slammed against the wooden doorframe, trapping me in the narrow alcove. Derek stood blocking my exit. The polished, confident aura of the golden child was gone. He looked like a hunted animal. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his breathing was shallow and erratic. He reeked of stale cologne and profound panic. "I need a favor," he whispered, his voice a tight, strained hiss. "It is a minor cash flow issue, a clerical hold on my primary accounts. I need you to co-sign a bridge loan for $100,000, just for 30 days until my quarterly bonuses clear." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand hang in the chilly air. He was actively under federal investigation. He had stolen from his clients. He had used my security credentials to launder money through a dummy vendor contract. And now he wanted me to legally bind my pristine credit score to his sinking ship to pay off the predatory lenders breathing down his neck. "You want me to co-sign a loan for $100,000, I repeated, keeping my tone clinically detached. "It is just a signature, Melanie," he pleaded, stepping closer and invading my personal space. "You just got that huge promotion. Your credit is flawless. The bank will approve it instantly with you as the guarantor. I will pay the monthly installments. You will not even notice the paperwork." I did not flinch. "I am not signing a bridge loan, Derek. I am not attaching my name to your financial liabilities. Figure out your own cash flow issues." I moved to step around him, but he shifted his weight, cutting off my path. The desperate pleading in his eyes hardened into something vicious and dangerous. The mask slipped, revealing the ruthless predator underneath. "Do not play games with me," he snarled, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "If you do not sign this paperwork, I will walk right back into that dining room and tell Dad you are hoarding your new salary. I will tell them you are refusing to help your own family over a temporary bank error. You know exactly whose side they will take. They will make your life a living hell until you hand over the money. Do you really want to deal with their relentless disappointment again?" He thought the threat of our parents' disapproval would break my resolve. He relied on the childhood dynamic where I always surrendered to keep the fragile domestic peace. He believed the fear of being labeled a selfish hoarder would force my hand to the pen. He was operating on an outdated blueprint. I looked directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. "Go ahead and tell them I said," my voice dropping to a freezing, unwavering register. "Tell Dad I refused. Tell Mom I am selfish. Let them yell, but I will never put my signature on a single document you provide." I pushed past his shoulder, forcing him to step aside or risk a physical altercation. He stumbled back, hitting the wall. I opened the front door and stepped out into the biting Alaskan wind. The cold air filled my lungs, washing away the suffocating toxicity of that house. Walking toward my car, I realized the intense gravity of the confrontation. Derek was out of time and out of options. The shadow lenders would not wait for a quarterly bonus that was never coming. If he could not extort the capital from his sister, he would be forced to seek out another vulnerable target to sustain his crumbling illusion. A desperate man drowning in debt will pull down anyone standing nearby just to catch a breath of air. I started my engine and pulled out of the driveway, my forensic mind already anticipating his next catastrophic move. If my credit was off limits, he would inevitably turn his hungry gaze toward the only other valuable asset left in our family portfolio. The undeniable realization settled over me like a heavy sheet of ice. The true danger had not passed. It was simply changing direction. The tires of my sport utility vehicle crushed the fresh snowfall as I drove away from my parents' estate. The heater blew dry air across my face, but the chill of my brother's hallway ambush lingered on my skin. He needed $100,000 immediately. Predatory shadow lenders do not offer extensions or sympathetic payment plans. They demand instant liquidity. I had firmly denied him access to my pristine credit rating. But a drowning parasite never stops thrashing in the water. He would simply latch onto the nearest buoyant object. If my financial fortress was locked, who else possessed the capital to appease those ruthless creditors? The answer hit me like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. For 3 generations, the Gomez family anchored its identity to a sprawling ecotourism lodge situated on the edge of Denali National Park. It was a breathtaking property featuring hand-hewn cedar logs, floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, and exclusive access to remote glacial hiking trails. My grandfather built the structure from raw timber and determination. It represented our heritage, our stability, and my parents' ultimate retirement sanctuary. They frequently boasted to their country club friends about the untouched equity sitting in that pristine wilderness real estate. It was a staggering asset, sitting free and clear, or so I always believed. Once inside my home office, I bypassed my usual corporate logistics software and accessed the Alaska State Property Records database. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a practiced mechanical rhythm. I entered the parcel identification number for the Denali Lodge. The system processed the request, rendering a stark white document on my monitor. I scrolled past the historical ownership transfers and the original land patents dating back decades. I was searching for recent encumbrances. The results populated on the glowing display, and the breath froze in my throat. A fresh lien sat glaring on the digital deed. It was not a standard home equity line of credit or a minor renovation loan. It was a highly toxic predatory reverse mortgage. The terms outlined in the public filing were staggering. The interest rates were astronomical, designed to cannibalize the underlying value of the property within a few short years. I verified the execution dates. The paperwork was signed and notarized 7 months ago, long before the disastrous seafood dinner, long before Elias Thorne publicly fired him. My parents knew Derek was suffocating in debt. They had quietly liquidated their entire retirement safety net, signing away the generational family legacy to secure a substantial cash infusion for their golden child. I needed to understand their exact justification for such a catastrophic financial suicide. As the designated executor of my father's primary living trust, I maintained legal access to his older financial correspondence archives. I navigated into the cloud server, isolating emails around the date the reverse mortgage cleared. The search query yielded a forwarded message sent from my mother Valerie to my father. Her written words were a masterclass in toxic entitlement. She urged Victor to sign the final loan documents to save Derek's reputation. She explicitly wrote that losing the cabin equity was a minor inconvenience because Melanie is climbing the corporate ladder at the oil firm and her new promotion salary will be more than enough to support our retirement lifestyle. The profound betrayal settled over me as a heavy, suffocating physical weight. My parents did not just enable a criminal. They willingly burned their own house down, fully expecting me to let them move into mine. They viewed my rigorous education, my 80-hour work weeks, and my hard-earned promotions as their personal insurance policy. They sacrificed the family crown jewel to cover my brother's felony theft, operating under the arrogant assumption that I would blindly foot the bill for their old age. I reached over to the printer on my desk and sent the reverse mortgage agreements alongside the damning email to the queue. The machine whirred to life, spitting out the crisp, warm pages. I punched holes in the paper and secured them inside my encrypted red binder. I smoothed my hand over the cover, feeling a profound shift in my internal architecture. The psychological conditioning of my childhood shattered into irreparable pieces. For years I operated under the delusion that hard work and quiet compliance would eventually earn their respect. The truth was far more clinical. My bloodline viewed me as a disposable financial shield. I realized I had to legally insulate myself from their impending bankruptcy before their ruin infected my own accounts. I drafted a swift directive to my personal wealth manager, placing a hard lock on all my private holdings and revoking my father's emergency access to my checking accounts. I required dual-factor authentication for any future transfers and instructed my bank to reject any inquiries originating from my parents' address. I formally excised the emotional ties to the people who raised me, replacing familial duty with unyielding self-preservation. The woman who sought their approval died in the glow of those computer monitors. A cold forensic architect took her place. The domestic drama had officially mutated into a fight for survival. I stared at the binder, knowing my parents were now marching toward inevitable destitution. Their country club friends would soon see the foreclosure notices. The facade they worshipped was built on a crumbling foundation of high-interest debt. But Derek was still a desperate, cornered animal. The bank of Mom and Dad was tapped out, and the shadow lenders were tightening the noose. He would have to look elsewhere for his next bailout. He knew I controlled millions in corporate logistical budgets for the oil extraction conglomerate. My signature authorized lucrative vendor payouts every single day. A starving predator always returns to the most profitable hunting ground. If he could not manipulate me as a sister, he would attempt to exploit me as an executive. He was preparing to escalate the war, and I needed to ready my corporate defenses for a direct frontal assault. The Anchorage headquarters of the oil extraction firm stood as a towering monument of glass and steel against the harsh Alaskan skyline. My corner office on the 14th floor offered a sweeping view of the frozen Cook Inlet. The environment demanded ruthless efficiency. Every morning, I reviewed multi-million-dollar supply chain manifests, directing heavy drilling equipment across the unforgiving tundra. The stakes were astronomical, and my workspace reflected that reality. My desk was carved from solid dark walnut, kept pristine and free of clutter. Built directly into the surface was a localized security console. I requested its installation months ago to record complex vendor negotiations and resolve contract disputes with irrefutable audio proof. A simple swipe of my thumb under the edge of the desk activated a concealed microphone, preserving every spoken word on a secured server. It was a standard corporate safeguard. I never expected to use it against my own flesh and blood. Tuesday morning brought a biting chill to the city. I was halfway through a quarterly expenditure report when the frosted glass door of my office swung open without a prior knock. I looked up from my monitor expecting my executive assistant. Instead, Derek stepped across the threshold. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, attempting to project the untouchable aura of a finance titan, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. His jaw was clenched tight, and a thin sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He had bypassed the lobby security using the very dummy vendor clearance I unwittingly approved weeks ago. The irony of his entry method registered in my mind with chilling clarity. He closed the heavy door behind him, engaging the privacy lock. The ambient hum of the corporate hallway vanished, leaving us in a tense, suffocating silence. The pleading brother facade he wore during our hallway confrontation had vanished entirely. He did not ask for a favor today. He paced across the carpeted floor, transforming from a desperate sibling into a cornered predator. The shadow lenders were tightening their grip, and Elias Thorne was undoubtedly compiling his federal dossier. Derek needed immediate liquidity to silence his creditors and bury the evidence before the authorities issued a subpoena. Since my personal bank accounts were impenetrable, he shifted his hungry gaze toward the boundless corporate coffers I managed. He leaned over my walnut desk, planting his palms flat on the polished wood. "We are done playing games, Melanie." He hissed, his voice a strained, venomous whisper. "The offshore accounts are frozen. The syndicate is demanding their return on investment by Friday. You control an annual logistics budget large enough to fund a small nation. I need you to authorize a swift, untraceable routing transfer to my primary holding company." I did not flinch. I maintained eye contact, letting his pathetic desperation echo in the quiet room. My right hand rested casually in my lap. I slowly moved my thumb, tracing the underside of the desk until I felt the smooth indentation of the security console. I pressed the hidden sensor. A microscopic amber light blinked to life near the pen holder. The system began recording, capturing high-fidelity audio of the entire exchange. "You are asking me to embezzle corporate funds," I stated, keeping my tone level and conversational to ensure the microphone picked up every syllable. "I am giving you an opportunity to save your own career," he countered, a smug, twisted smile forming on his lips. "I kept copies of the vendor approvals you signed, the ones connecting your name to my shell entities. If you refuse to route this payment, I will email a highly convincing portfolio of forged compliance violations directly to your board of directors. I will fabricate a paper trail proving you orchestrated the entire money laundering operation using my firm as a cover. Your pristine reputation will shatter overnight. The executives will terminate you pending a federal inquiry, and you will face the exact same prison sentence I am currently dodging. Funnel the capital today, or I burn your life to the ground." He genuinely thought the threat of a corporate scandal would break my nerve. He relied on the assumption that a woman who spent years earning her rank would sacrifice anything to protect it. I leaned back in my leather chair, studying the frantic man standing before me. He possessed the arrogance of a golden child, but lacked the intellect of a true criminal. He fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of leverage. "I will not authorize a single transfer," I informed him, my voice as cold as the glacier outside my window. "You are attempting to extort a senior executive on private property. The legal definition of your current action is corporate espionage combined with felony blackmail. You have exactly 2 minutes to unlock that door and walk out of this building. When those 2 minutes expire, I will press the panic button under my desk and have armed guards escort you to the local police precinct." Derek scoffed, shaking his head in arrogant disbelief. He stood up straight, adjusting his suit jacket to feign untouchable confidence. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, Melanie. You have until tomorrow morning to change your mind before I hit send on those emails. You will transfer the cash. You have too much to lose." He turned on his heel and strode out of the office, leaving the frosted glass door ajar. He strutted down the corridor, convinced his intimidation tactics had secured his financial salvation. He remained utterly oblivious to the blinking amber light on my desk. He had just handed me a flawless, unedited audio confession detailing his intent to commit blackmail and fraud. I tapped the sensor again, halting the recording. I extracted the digital file and securely transferred it into my encrypted red binder. The leverage had shifted firmly into my hands. Yet a new calculating thought surfaced in my mind. A drowning man does not formulate empty threats. If he possessed the forged documents, he would inevitably deploy them. The real danger lay not in his words, but in his next desperate action. He intended to sever my professional lifeline to save his own skin. The corporate strike was coming, and I needed to brace for the immediate impact. The crisp morning air bit at my cheeks as I walked from the parking garage to the towering glass entrance of the oil conglomerate headquarters. The Anchorage sky was painted a pale, bruised gray, reflecting the frozen surface of the inlet. I carried my usual thermos of dark roast coffee, ready to dive into the quarterly supply chain manifests. My mind was already calculating the most efficient routes for moving heavy drilling machinery across the icy tundra. I swiped my proximity badge at the secure turnstile, expecting the familiar green light and the satisfying metallic click of the gate releasing. Instead, the terminal flashed a harsh crimson red. A sharp arrow tone echoed through the bustling lobby. 2 uniformed security guards standing near the reception desk immediately turned their heads. One of them placed a hand on his radio, stepping toward me with rigid purpose. Before he could speak, the head of human resources emerged from a nearby elevator bank, accompanied by the chief compliance officer. His name was Donovan, a man whose entire career revolved around mitigating corporate disasters and sniffing out internal corruption. His face was pale, tight with an uncomfortable tension that instantly signaled a catastrophic shift in my reality. "Melanie," he said, his voice a low, forced murmur designed to avoid drawing a crowd, "we need you to step away from the turnstile. Please come with us to the executive suite on the 9th floor. We have an urgent matter to discuss." I did not ask questions. I did not demand an explanation in the middle of a crowded lobby. I simply nodded, maintaining a calm, professional stride as I followed them into a restricted service elevator. The ride up was suffocatingly silent. My forensic instincts instantly connected the crimson error light to the threat my brother had hissed in my office just 24 hours prior. Derek had actually pulled the trigger. The desperate, cornered parasite had decided to detonate a bomb in my career to create a smokescreen for his own impending federal ruin. Donovan ushered me into a sterile, windowless conference room. He gestured toward a cold metal chair opposite his own. Resting in the center of the dark wooden table was a thick physical file folder stamped with the word "Confidential" in stark black ink. He unclasped the file and slid a series of printed documents across the polished surface. I looked down at the papers. They were internal invoices and routing authorizations tied directly to the dummy logistics vendor contract I had unwittingly co-signed for my brother months ago. The documents detailed authorized payouts for winter transport routes and specialized drilling equipment. Millions of dollars in corporate capital had supposedly been funneled to this vendor over the past 8 weeks. At the bottom of every single fraudulent payout request sat a perfect digital rendering of my signature, along with my unique employee identification code. This morning, our automated internal audit flagged a series of highly irregular capital transfers, Donovan explained, interlacing his fingers on the table. The funds were routed to an external vendor you personally cleared. The vendor claims to be transporting crude extraction machinery, but the GPS logs on those routes show zero physical movement. The money vanished into a Delaware holding account. The paper trail indicates you have been using your senior access to unilaterally authorize phantom invoices. I stared at the forged signatures. To an untrained eye, they looked flawless. But my mind instantly dissected the structural anatomy of the digital fabrication. Derek had used the initial clearance paperwork I signed, slicing the digital encryption key and pasting it onto these fabricated invoices. It was a sloppy, desperate maneuver. A thorough review of the metadata would expose the discrepancy in the server timestamps and prove the IP address originated outside our corporate firewall. But corporate compliance departments do not operate on benefit of the doubt. They operate on immediate risk containment. We are facing a severe federal inquiry, Donovan continued, his tone adopting a bureaucratic chill. Because these funds cross state lines into shadow accounts, the authorities are already involved. Effective immediately, your employment is suspended pending a comprehensive external investigation. You are required to surrender your corporate phone, your company laptop, and any physical keys in your possession. You are barred from contacting any employees or accessing any company servers. A normal person confronted with a shattered career and impending federal charges would crumble. They would weep, deny the accusations, and beg for their job. I felt the familiar weight of my childhood conditioning attempting to surface, urging me to panic over the spectacular mess my brother had created. I pushed that weakness down, burying it beneath a glacier of pure logic. Panic is a luxury reserved for prey. I reached into my briefcase, extracted my corporate laptop, and placed it gently on the table next to the forged documents. I unclipped my proximity badge and set it beside the computer. I understand the protocol. Donovan, I stated, my voice unwavering. I highly recommend your external investigators analyze the localized MAC addresses attached to those specific invoice approvals. You will find they do not match my assigned hardware. Donovan blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of hysteria. He nodded stiffly, gathering the items. 2 security guards escorted me back down to the lobby and out into the biting Alaskan wind. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, sealing me out of the fortress I had spent years building. I stood on the freezing pavement, breathing in the sharp air. The stakes had fundamentally shifted. Derek was no longer just a disgraced finance clerk drowning in debt. He was an active existential threat to my freedom. He intended to let me take the fall for his money laundering syndicate. I walked to my vehicle, the snow crunching under my boots. I did not drive to my isolated cabin to mourn my suspended career. I merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the heart of the Anchorage financial district. I needed a predator who operated outside the standard corporate hierarchy. I needed Silas. Silas was a high-tier corporate litigation attorney, renowned across the Pacific Northwest for his ruthless expertise in offshore asset recovery and hostile takeovers. He did not represent individuals going through standard domestic disputes. He represented titans who needed dirty capital scrubbed clean or stolen empires reclaimed. His office sat on the top floor of a sleek steel high-rise overlooking the deep, icy fjords. I bypassed his receptionist, having secured a discreet emergency appointment during my drive over. I entered his expansive office. Silas stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, holding a ceramic mug of dark coffee. He wore a pristine navy suit, projecting an aura of quiet, lethal intelligence. He turned to face me, his sharp gray eyes assessing my demeanor instantly. He knew my corporate rank, and he knew a suspension of my caliber meant a staggering amount of money was missing. I did not offer pleasantries. I sat in the leather guest chair and pulled a sleek, encrypted flash drive from my pocket. I placed it squarely on his glass desk. My brother is running a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, hiding stolen oil funds in Delaware shell companies, I announced, my tone clinical and detached. He just framed me for the theft, using forged digital signatures to funnel the blame onto my department. He intends to use my clean record as a shield against a pending SEC indictment. Silas set his coffee mug down and picked up the flash drive. He inserted it into his secure terminal. "What exactly am I looking at?" he asked, his fingers flying across the keyboard to bypass my encryption layers. "You are looking at an airtight digital guillotine," I replied. "You will find the IP logs proving the forged signatures originated from his personal router. You will find the complete tracing history of his offshore holding accounts. And most importantly, you will find a high-fidelity audio recording from yesterday morning where he explicitly threatens to blackmail me with those exact forged documents if I refuse to pay his predatory lenders." Silas paused. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He clicked the audio file. The clear sound of Derek snarling his extortion demands filled the quiet office. Silas listened to every desperate, venomous word my brother spoke. The attorney leaned back in his chair, his eyes lighting up with the distinct thrill of a hunter realizing the prey had just walked into a steel trap. "This is not just a defense strategy," Silas murmured, tapping a silver pen against his chin. "This is a weapon of mass financial destruction. The digital forensics on these forged signatures are undeniably pristine. Combined with the extortion audio, we do not just clear your name, Melanie. We hand the federal authorities a perfect map to his entire criminal network." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the cool glass. "I do not just want my name cleared, Silas. He tried to take my freedom to save his own skin. I want a catastrophic counterstrike. I want every single asset he possesses locked down. I want his offshore accounts frozen. I want to leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back when the federal marshals finally arrive." Silas nodded, his mind already drafting the lethal legal motions required to execute the maneuver. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him, plotting the trajectory of the impending strike. We would bypass the local authorities entirely, feeding the raw, undeniable data directly to the highest levels of federal enforcement. The war was officially armed and ready to detonate. But as we finalized the timing of our document submission, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A barrage of frantic text messages illuminated the screen. They were from my mother, Valerie. The words painted a picture of profound, absurd delusion. Derek, realizing his corporate sabotage might not hold up against an impending audit, had executed a brilliant, cowardly pivot to buy himself time. He had packed his bags and fled the city under the guise of seeking professional help. The Golden Child was orchestrating a desperate diversion, and my parents were eagerly swallowing the bait, demanding I drop my petty anger to support his healing journey. The next phase of his manipulation had begun. Silas and I spent the afternoon finalizing the federal whistleblower complaint. The paperwork formed a flawless, lethal snare. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the glass desk. A barrage of missed calls and frantic text messages illuminated the screen. My father and mother were desperately trying to reach me. I ignored them, letting the notifications stack up, while Silas drafted the final injunctions to freeze the dummy vendor accounts. We operated in total silence, communicating only through the exchange of verified data. When I finally stepped out of the high-rise building, the Alaskan air felt crisp and clarifying. I unlocked my vehicle and checked the chaotic thread of messages. Victor had sent a long, rambling paragraph demanding family unity. Valerie followed up with emotional pleas, stating my brother had suffered a severe psychological collapse. Derek had supposedly cracked under the immense pressure of his high-stakes finance career. To save his fragile mind, they had checked him into the Serenity Summit Wellness Lodge, an ultra-exclusive mountain retreat accessible only by private helicopter. They wanted me to drop my petty anger and support his healing journey. It was a brilliant theatrical diversion, a classic red herring designed to buy him time and foster complacency. He wanted the compliance officers and federal agents to view him as a broken man seeking redemption. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. The Chugach Mountains loomed in the distance like silent sentinels watching the drama unfold across the icy terrain. My vehicle heater roared, pushing back the Arctic chill, but my mind remained locked in a state of deep, glacial focus. I drove back to my insulated cabin, the tires gripping the icy asphalt. Once inside, I booted up my encrypted terminal. I did not search for the spa amenities or the yoga schedules of the Serenity Summit Wellness Lodge. I pulled the network infrastructure and the digital registration of the facility. The data loaded on my monitor, revealing the true nature of his so-called sanctuary. The lodge was not just a health spa. It was a notorious haven for white-collar executives facing impending audits. The facility boasted impenetrable cybersecurity, featuring heavily encrypted proprietary servers routed through jurisdictions without extradition treaties. White-collar criminals utilized these specific mountain retreats because federal search warrants required complex jurisdictional gymnastics to execute a raid. The servers operated on dynamic bouncing protocols meant to scramble financial data into meaningless static. Derek was not sitting in a meditation circle. He was locked in a luxury suite, shielded by private servers systematically destroying digital evidence. He was using the unmonitored connection to funnel his remaining stolen capital into offshore, untouchable accounts. He thought the remote mountain altitude and luxury facade provided the perfect shield to delete his fraudulent transaction logs. He intended to walk out of that spa a week later, claiming he had found inner peace while leaving me holding a meticulously constructed bag of felonies. He underestimated the tenacity of a senior logistics auditor who knew exactly how to dismantle encrypted firewalls. While I mapped the network protocol to intercept his outbound wire transfers, a sharp knock echoed through the timber walls of my cabin. I glanced at the security feed on my secondary monitor. Valerie stood on my front porch, wrapping a heavy mink coat tightly around her shoulders. Her breath plumed in the freezing air. She had driven an hour out of Anchorage to deliver her manipulation in person. She wrapped the expensive fur tighter around her neck, a status symbol bought and paid for by the very fraud she was asking me to cover up. I walked to the front door and disengaged the deadbolt. I did not invite her inside. The bitter wind swept into the entryway, but I stood firm, blocking the threshold. Valerie looked at me with wide, manufactured tears pooling in her eyes. She reached out, attempting to grab my hands, but I took a calculated step backward. "Melanie, please, you have to listen to me," she pleaded, her voice trembling with artificial sorrow. "We are running out of time. The oil executives are asking terrifying questions, and the compliance office called your father. Derek is so fragile right now. His mind is shattered. He cannot survive a federal trial. He would not make it a week in a prison cell." I maintained a flat, clinical gaze. He should have considered his fragile disposition before he embezzled millions of dollars and framed his sister for the theft, I replied. Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as if I had struck her physically. She dropped the weeping mother routine, the panic morphing into a calculated, toxic negotiation. Her desperation stripped away the polished country club matriarch, revealing a terrified enabler willing to cannibalize her own offspring to maintain a social illusion. She leaned closer, her perfume clashing with the crisp mountain air. "You are single, Melanie," she whispered, her tone dripping with poisonous entitlement. "You do not have a husband. You do not have children relying on you. Derek has a wife. He has a future to protect. You have always been so resilient, so capable of bouncing back from adversity. You can take the blame for these accounting errors. You can tell the board you made a mistake with the vendor approvals. They will fire you, but they might not prosecute a senior employee who confesses to a simple clerical oversight. We will support you. We will pay your rent until you find another job. Just say it was your mistake. You owe it to this family." The audacity of her request hung in the freezing air. The woman who gave birth to me was standing on my porch actively begging me to sacrifice my freedom, my unblemished career, and my entire future just to shield a parasite from the consequences of his own greed. She viewed me as an empty vessel, a convenient scapegoat whose life held zero intrinsic value compared to the golden child. For 3 decades, I had subconsciously sought her approval. I had taken the blame for broken snowmobiles and swallowed my pride to keep the peace. In that exact moment, the invisible chains of my youth dissolved into dust. The psychological conditioning evaporated, leaving behind a hardened, impenetrable armor. I looked at her not as a daughter seeking love, but as an architect inspecting a condemned building. I will not take the fall for a thief, I stated, my voice radiating a quiet, lethal serenity. I am not your safety net, and I am no longer your daughter. You chose your side. Now you will watch it burn. Do not ever step foot on my property again. I stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door, shutting the deadbolt with a loud, definitive clack. I did not look through the peephole. I walked straight back to my home office, leaving her standing in the freezing cold. I felt a profound, immense liberation. The familial guilt was gone. I was free to execute the counterstrike without a single ounce of hesitation. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. Derek was attempting to scrub his digital footprints through the Mountain Retreat servers. I deployed a specialized tracing algorithm designed to shadow his outbound data packets. I needed to see the exact destination of the remaining stolen funds before he erased the ledger entirely. I bypassed the initial layer of his shell network, watching the capital flow through a series of complex proxy accounts. The tracing algorithm hummed, running a localized query against the Alaskan Commerce Registry. The money bypassed the standard Caribbean tax havens. It routed backward, funneling into a localized domestic holding account. The data decrypted line by line, unmasking the ultimate destination of the final capital transfer. The money did not vanish into the ether. It settled into an account held at a prestigious local banking branch. I pulled the state business registry to identify the entity receiving the laundered cash. The corporate charter displayed on my monitor outlined an independent consulting firm specializing in regional ecotourism development. The search results populated on my screen, and the breath caught sharply in my throat. The holding company did not belong to a random shadow associate. The managing director listed on the official state charter was my own father, Victor Gomez. The puzzle pieces crashed together with sickening clarity, exposing a truth far darker than a solo embezzlement scheme. The betrayal multiplied, expanding from sibling sabotage into a full-fledged familial crime syndicate. The name staring back at me from the state business registry burned a permanent hole in my understanding of reality. Victor Gomez, my father, the man who had stood in that upscale seafood restaurant and offered a booming, arrogant toast to my brother while quietly digesting a dinner funded by stolen corporate capital. I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing monitor, my fingers hovering frozen over the keyboard. I navigated into the deeper historical filings for his independent consulting firm. For over a decade, my father claimed his business provided high-level strategic guidance to ecotourism startups across the Alaskan frontier. He used that title to justify his country club memberships and his seat at elite charity dinners. The tax returns loaded onto my screen, painting a starkly different picture. The consulting firm generated zero legitimate revenue. There were no client contracts, no marketing expenditures, and no actual logistical services rendered to any ecotourism companies. The entire operation was a hollow vessel, built entirely out of forged paperwork and fabricated ledgers. I routed the search parameters to cross-reference the incoming capital. The digital ledger displayed a steady, unbroken stream of deposits matching the exact dollar amounts Derek had siphoned from the oil executives. The mechanics of their syndicate became chillingly clear. My brother stole the investment capital, funneled it through the fake transport vendor using my forged digital signature, and then dumped the clean, untraceable cash directly into our father's corporate holding account. The betrayal metastasized, spreading from a desperate sibling rivalry into a highly organized, generational crime ring. My parents had not executed that toxic reverse mortgage on the Denali cabin simply out of misguided parental loyalty. They signed away the family legacy because Elias Thorne had fired Derek, instantly severing their primary illicit income stream. They needed a sudden cash infusion to maintain their own pristine, high society illusion. I analyzed the outgoing expense column from Victor's firm. The laundered cash did not go toward business investments or property development. The funds paid for Valerie's mink coats. The money covered the exorbitant initiation fees at their premier golf club. It financed their vintage wine collection and their luxury vacations to international resorts. They knew Derek was a thief. They actively facilitated the theft, providing the corporate washing machine required to scrub the dirty money clean. They took a lucrative cut of the spoils to sustain their unearned prestige while treating my authentic career as a convenient disposable shield. I gathered the printed routing logs, the forged vendor contracts, and the dummy corporation tax filings. I slid the crisp pages into a sleek leather portfolio, sealing the undeniable proof of their federal crimes. I drove back toward the financial district, navigating the icy Anchorage streets with a dangerous newfound clarity. The sky overhead mirrored the heavy bruised gray of my impending strike. The psychological conditioning of my childhood, the desperate yearning for their validation, dissolved entirely into the freezing wind. I was no longer a daughter seeking approval. I was an executioner carrying the exact instruments of their downfall. Silas sat in his corner office reviewing the initial injunction drafts we had prepared earlier. He looked up as I entered, recognizing the subtle shift in my posture. I placed the new portfolio directly onto his glass desk. The scope of the investigation just expanded, I stated, my voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. My parents are not innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. They are the primary laundering hub. Silas picked up the documents. His sharp gray eyes darted across the highlighted routing numbers and the fake consulting invoices. A slow, predatory smile crept across his face, altering his calm demeanor into something genuinely lethal. "This is a masterpiece of unforced errors," Silas murmured, tracing his silver pen over Victor's signature on the tax returns. They routed stolen corporate capital through a family-owned entity to purchase personal luxury goods. The Internal Revenue Service will dismantle them before the ink even dries on the indictment. We spent the next 4 hours locked in his office, ordering black coffee and ignoring the ticking clock. We transformed the raw, scattered data into a pristine, chronological legal narrative. We crafted a formal whistleblower complaint addressed directly to the enforcement divisions of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The document provided a flawless roadmap to their destruction. We included the IP logs from the Mountain Wellness Retreat, proving Derek was actively utilizing a non-extradition server to destroy digital evidence. We attached the forged logistics contracts, legally exonerating my name, while aiming the spotlight squarely at his dummy corporation. We provided the banking histories linking the embezzled oil funds to my father's fake ecotourism business. Every stolen dollar was meticulously accounted for, leaving the federal agents with an airtight prepackaged criminal case. "Are you certain about this?" Silas asked, his hand hovering over the encrypted submission portal. "Once I hit send, the federal machinery engages. There is no turning back. Your entire bloodline will face severe mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary." I looked out the window at the frozen harbor, watching the commercial fishing boats navigate the treacherous dark waters. I thought about my mother standing on my porch, begging me to sacrifice my freedom and my unblemished career to save her jewelry budget. I thought about my father mocking my promotion while spending the money his son stole from my employers. They had viewed my integrity as a weakness to be exploited. "Send it," I replied, my tone devoid of any lingering warmth or hesitation. Silas pressed the key. The digital packet soared through the secure network, landing directly on the desks of senior federal agents. My professional reputation was officially shielded. The compliance officers at my oil conglomerate would soon receive the federal clearance, confirming my innocence and reinstating my rank. I had successfully severed the parasitic cord attempting to drag me down. The profound relief of clearing my name was instantly replaced by a cold, satisfying anticipation. The federal authorities would take a few days to secure their warrants, mobilize their tactical teams, and organize the raids. The silence before the storm was already ticking away. Derek and Paige were still spending phantom money, entirely oblivious to the fact that their financial foundation was rigged with explosives. In the meantime, the shadow lenders Derek had desperately borrowed from were running out of patience. The toxic predatory debt he acquired to cover his wife's diamond necklace and luxury snowmobiles was currently floating on the secondary market. The creditors wanted their money, and they were preparing to sell the delinquent accounts to the highest bidder. If I wanted to guarantee their total ruin, I needed to control the fallout from every possible angle. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, I held the leash to every single asset they mistakenly believed they owned. My focus shifted from federal prosecution to absolute personal acquisition. The federal whistleblower dossier rested securely within the encrypted servers of the enforcement agencies. Silas leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a quiet breath of satisfaction. The government machinery possessed a terrifying weight, but bureaucracy always moves at a deliberate, unhurried pace. Investigators would spend days validating the routing numbers, acquiring judicial signatures for search warrants, and coordinating tactical teams. During that quiet window, my brother and his entitled wife would continue to breathe freely. They would keep spending stolen cash and projecting an illusion of elite superiority. I refused to grant them even a temporary reprieve. While the authorities prepared to strip away their freedom, I intended to legally acquire their entire material existence. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the frozen fjords of the Anchorage coastline. The icy water mirrored the cold calculation taking root in my mind. Derek had panicked when Elias Thorne locked him out of his illicit corporate accounts. To sustain Paige and her insatiable thirst for luxury, he bypassed traditional banking institutions. He sought out shadow lenders, securing high-interest personal loans and predatory credit lines. Those specific financial instruments carried treacherous terms designed to exploit desperate borrowers. More importantly, those subprime contracts contained buried clauses, allowing the immediate sale and transfer of the debt to third-party collection entities. I turned back to the glass desk, addressing the attorney. "The feds will handle the criminal prosecution," I stated, my tone devoid of hesitation. But Derek financed his wife and her $30,000 diamond necklace using unsecured subprime debt. The lenders are already issuing overdraft alerts. I want to buy those specific liabilities. I want to own every single dollar he owes. Silas did not blink. His sharp gray eyes assessed the strategic brilliance of the maneuver. A slow, approving smile crept across his features. "The secondary debt market is a ruthless ecosystem," he murmured, tapping his silver pen against a fresh legal pad. "Brokers typically sell delinquent portfolios in bundled packages for pennies on the dollar. Extracting a specific individual requires capital and pinpoint precision. We will have to offer a premium cash buyout to secure his exact promissory notes." I sat down in the guest chair, crossing my arms. "Draft the paperwork." Silas operated with breathtaking efficiency. Utilizing his elite network of corporate contacts, he initiated the formation of a heavily obfuscated holding company. We registered the entity in Delaware, taking full advantage of the state and its notoriously opaque corporate privacy laws. We named the shell corporation Obsidian Asset Recovery. On paper, it appeared as a faceless institutional collection agency managed by a blind trust. In reality, I was the sole proprietor and exclusive beneficiary of every legal action it executed. Within 2 hours, Silas contacted the shadowy brokerage firms holding my brother and his toxic loans. The negotiations were swift and devoid of sentiment. The brokers were thrilled to offload high-risk paper involving a recently terminated finance clerk. They did not ask why an anonymous Delaware corporation wanted to pay a premium for a failing Anchorage portfolio. They simply accepted the wire transfers and electronically signed over the titles. By late afternoon, the digital transactions cleared the clearinghouses. Silas printed the finalized contracts and slid the thick stack of paper across the desk. I looked down at the documents bearing my brother and his forged signatures. We had successfully purchased the exclusive collection rights to his predatory personal loans. We acquired the direct financing contracts for the 2 luxury snowmobiles Paige had recently flaunted. We secured the primary lien against the custom teardrop diamond necklace. In the span of a single afternoon, I secretly transformed into my brother and his undisputed primary creditor. The legal authority granted by this transaction was staggering. Obsidian Asset Recovery did not merely hold pieces of paper. I possessed the immediate binding power to financially execute him at a moment's notice. In the American legal system, a primary creditor holding validated delinquent debt wields terrifying remedies. I held the authorized right to petition the court for swift wage garnishments. If Derek ever managed to secure a minimum wage job sweeping floors, I could legally intercept his paycheck before he even bought groceries. I controlled the authority to initiate instantaneous bank levies, freezing any account bearing his name. Furthermore, I possessed the unyielding power to repossess his physical property the second a payment deadline expired. I traced my index finger over the ink on the promissory notes. Derek was drowning in a nightmare of his own creation. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of superior wealth, treating me like a disposable blue-collar worker. He thought his quick pivot to a wellness retreat would shield him from consequences. He remained entirely oblivious to the fact that his quiet, pragmatic sister now held the leash to his entire material world. The profound, dramatic irony of the situation provided a deep, sustaining satisfaction. Later that evening, I sat in my insulated cabin sipping dark roast coffee while scrolling through social media on a burner account. Paige had just uploaded a new series of photographs. She posed in the snow-covered driveway of their sprawling Anchorage home, wearing pristine designer winter gear. The stolen diamond teardrop necklace rested prominently against her throat, catching the crisp winter sunlight. The caption read that she was feeling so blessed and untouchable in her beautiful life. She smiled for the camera, radiating haughty entitlement. She genuinely believed her husband was a financial genius, navigating a temporary minor setback. She thought her luxury snowmobiles parked in the background were the hard-earned rewards of their elite status. She had no idea she was standing on a buried landmine. She did not know the diamonds around her neck and the machines in her driveway legally belonged to a Delaware shell company controlled by the very woman she constantly mocked. Derek appeared in the background of one video clip. He held a glass of expensive bourbon, attempting to project his usual arrogant swagger. But my forensic eye caught the subtle tells of a cornered predator. His posture was rigid. His smile failed to reach his eyes. He was glancing nervously at his phone, waiting for the shadow lenders to call, demanding their weekly extortionate interest payments. He believed he was dodging faceless corporate debt collectors. He never suspected the calls were coming from inside his own family. The pressure cooker was sealed, and the heat was rising to an inescapable degree. I watched the video loop 3 times, letting their fabricated reality burn into my memory. They were feasting at a banquet, entirely unaware that I owned the table, the chairs, and the food on their plates. I closed the social media application and opened my secure email server. Silas had prepared the formal notices of arrears. These were stark, legally binding documents detailing the severe delinquency of the luxury asset loans. The letters outlined the immediate, impending repossession of the snowmobiles and the jewelry unless the outstanding balances were paid in full within 48 hours. We did not mail these notices to Derek and his hidden wellness retreat email. We targeted the weak link in his armor. We routed the certified digital notices directly to Paige and her personal inbox. Derek had spent the last week desperately shielding his wife from the truth, terrified that her shallow loyalty would evaporate the second the money ran dry. He insulated her from the termination, the federal investigations, and the crushing debt keeping her pacified with stolen gifts. Sending those collection notices to Paige was the equivalent of tossing a lit match into a room filled with gasoline. I authorized the digital delivery. The encrypted server hummed, pushing the legal documents through the network. The facade was about to shatter in the most spectacular and devastating manner possible. Paige was about to wake up and realize she was married to a bankrupt fraud. Her inevitable reaction would not be supportive or kind. A parasite stripped of its host always turns vicious. The countdown to her explosive realization had officially begun, setting the stage for a spectacular collision. The digital notification arrived on a quiet, freezing Thursday morning, severing the fragile remaining threads of the golden child illusion. Paige sat at the sprawling quartz island of her Anchorage kitchen, sipping an expensive matcha latte. Her phone chimed a sharp, jarring tone against the marble countertops. She expected an invitation to a charity luncheon or a confirmation for a boutique fitting. Instead, the subject line of the email read, "Urgent Notice of Default." Assuming it was a rudimentary phishing scam, she tapped the screen with a manicured fingernail, ready to delete the message. The document loaded, displaying the official seal of an unfamiliar Delaware holding company. Her breath hitched. The formal letter listed the exact vehicle identification number of her pristine luxury sport utility vehicle. It detailed severe delinquency, outlining 3 missed payments and demanding immediate surrender of the asset. A cold, unsettling dread coiled in her stomach. Paige marched down the carpeted hallway toward her husband's private sanctuary. Derek always kept his home office locked, enforcing a strict boundary to protect his so-called confidential finance operations. Today, the heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. He had left in a frantic rush earlier that morning, claiming he needed to attend an emergency off-site client meeting. Paige pushed the door open. The room smelled of stale coffee and sharp, anxious sweat. She bypassed his dual monitors and went straight for the heavy mahogany filing cabinets. She pulled the top drawer, finding nothing but generic tax forms. The second drawer resisted slightly. She yanked it hard, breaking the cheap internal lock. Tucked beneath a stack of blank printer paper lay a textured leather folio. She opened the cover and the reality of her marriage shattered into irreparable pieces. The first document she pulled was printed on the elite investment firm official premium letterhead. It bore the stark, uncompromising signature of Elias Thorne. The text outlined immediate termination, citing severe ethical breaches and the falsification of high-yield client portfolios. Next, she uncovered a stack of brutal, unyielding letters from local banks. They were final foreclosure warnings, detailing the impending auction of the very house she was standing inside. The luxurious existence she bragged about to her pageant friends was a hollow, rotting facade. Her husband was not a rising titan of the Alaskan finance sector. He was a destitute, terrified fraud, hiding behind borrowed cash and stolen corporate funds. The entitlement she harbored instantly mutated into a vicious, selfish survival instinct. She realized the ship was sinking fast, and she refused to go down with the wreckage. Paige needed a lifeboat, and she knew exactly who possessed the capital to fund her escape. The Anchorage sky outside my corporate office window mirrored the churning, icy gray waters of the Cook Inlet. I sat at my walnut desk reviewing a fresh batch of logistical supply routes when the frosted glass door swung open. My executive assistant did not even have time to announce the intrusion. Paige marched into my workspace wearing a tailored ivory winter coat. The stolen $30,000 teardrop diamond necklace rested prominently against her throat. Her face, usually a carefully contoured mask of smug superiority, was flushed with frantic, desperate energy. She slammed her designer leather handbag onto my desk. The scent of her floral perfume filled the air, clashing sharply with the sterile professional environment. She did not bother offering a polite greeting. The sweet, innocent sister-in-law facade she maintained at Sunday dinners vanished. She looked like a cornered viper ready to strike the nearest target to secure her own survival. "You knew," Paige hissed, her voice a tight, venomous whisper. She leaned over the desk, her eyes darting around my office. "You knew he was broke. I found the termination letter from his boss. I found the foreclosure notices hidden in his desk drawer. He is a criminal, Melanie. He lied to me about everything. He told me his accounts were just temporarily frozen due to a standard tax audit. He is drowning in debt, and the bank is preparing to take my house." I maintained my posture, resting my hands evenly on the polished wood. I observed her panic with pure clinical detachment. I did not offer a tissue or a sympathetic nod. "He is your husband, Paige," I replied, my tone steady and cool. "His financial liabilities are your marital obligations. You married him for his wealth. It seems you simply failed to verify the source of his funding before you signed the marriage certificate." She scoffed, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "I am not going down with a sinking ship. I am filing for divorce this afternoon. I am leaving this freezing, miserable state and flying back to California. But I need capital to start over. I need cash to secure a top-tier divorce attorney and lease a new apartment before his creditors freeze my checking accounts." She planted both hands on my desk, leaning closer. "I need $50,000 today. You are going to wire it to my personal account by noon." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her demand echo in the quiet room. She was demanding a buyout. "You are attempting to extort me," I stated, clarifying her intent for the hidden security microphone, recording every word of our interaction. "It is not extortion, Melanie. It is a simple business transaction," Paige countered, a dangerous gleam flashing in her eyes. "I know Derek used your corporate clearance to set up his dummy logistics vendor. I know your digital signature is all over those fraudulent invoices. If you do not wire me $50,000 right now, I will walk straight to the Anchorage Press. I will tell the local reporters that you were the mastermind behind the entire embezzlement scheme. I will publicly claim you used your brother as a pawn to steal millions from the oil executives. Your pristine corporate reputation reputation will shatter. The board of directors will fire you before the evening news airs. Pay me the hush money and I will quietly disappear." The dramatic irony hanging in the office was almost tangible. Paige stood there demanding $50,000 from a woman she believed was a terrified, vulnerable target. She felt incredibly powerful, threatening to expose my career. She had no idea she was trying to blackmail the sole proprietor of a Delaware holding company that legally owned every single asset tied to her name. I looked at the diamond necklace sparkling on her chest. I glanced out the window, spotting her luxury sport utility vehicle parked illegally in the visitor loading zone far below. She drove a car I technically possessed to demand cash she would never receive. "Your threat relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of leverage," I informed her, keeping my voice eerily calm. "You are operating under the assumption that I fear public scrutiny. My compliance department is already running a comprehensive internal audit. They possess the IP logs proving Derek forged those signatures from his personal router. The federal authorities have the exact routing numbers linking his shell companies to your designer wardrobe. You do not hold any explosive secrets, Paige. You only hold stolen merchandise." Her confidence faltered. She took a half step back, her manicured hands trembling slightly. "You are bluffing," she stammered. "You have millions in your corporate budget. $50,000 is a minor expense to guarantee your peace of mind." I stood up from my leather chair, projecting undeniable authority. "I will not wire you a single cent," I declared. "You are an accomplice to a federal crime attempting to blackmail a senior executive. Any further demands will be met with swift, unyielding consequences. You are standing in my office wearing diamonds purchased with laundered money. Every dollar you demand accelerates your own ruin. I suggest you take your handbag and exit this facility immediately before I call building security to escort you out." Paige stared at me, her jaw tight with furious indignation. The realization that her extortion plot had failed spectacularly hit her hard. She let out a frustrated shriek, grabbing her designer bag from my desk. "You are just as selfish and miserable as your brother," she yelled, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are going to regret this, Melanie. I will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of monster you are." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the office, leaving the frosted glass door wide open. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the street. A few minutes later, Paige emerged from the building lobby. She marched across the icy pavement, her ivory coat flapping in the bitter wind. She unlocked the luxury sport utility vehicle, climbing into the driver's seat and slamming the heavy door shut. The engine roared to life, and she sped away from the curb, entirely oblivious to the stark reality of her situation. She drove away in a machine legally collateralized by my asset recovery firm. She believed she was speeding toward an attorney to negotiate a lucrative divorce settlement. In truth, she was driving a repossessed asset straight toward an inescapable financial slaughterhouse. The golden couple was actively tearing each other apart from the inside. Their mutual greed had transformed their marriage into a toxic battleground. Derek was desperately trying to hide his crimes while his wife scrambled to extort his family to fund her escape. They were doing the heavy lifting of dismantling their own lives. I returned to my desk and picked up my secure phone. The parasites were neutralizing themselves, but the architects of the original betrayal remained untouched. It was time to shift the crosshairs toward the people who orchestrated the reverse mortgage and sacrificed their daughter to save a thief. The wheels of federal justice grind with a terrifying silent efficiency until the exact moment they strike. On a freezing Tuesday morning, the temperature in Anchorage hovered near 0 degrees. The dark sky offered no warmth as a caravan of unmarked dark vehicles rolled silently into my brother's pristine gated community. My encrypted terminal granted me limited access to public court dockets, but Silas provided real-time updates from his contacts within the enforcement divisions. The strike was a synchronized masterpiece of tactical precision designed to incapacitate the target before he could destroy another shred of evidence. Agents wearing heavy windbreakers emblazoned with crisp yellow letters descended upon Derek's sprawling home. They did not knock politely. A tactical battering ram shattered the custom mahogany front door, ripping the heavy deadbolts straight out of the doorframe. The harsh crack of splintering wood echoed through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. Paige awoke to the terrifying sound of federal boots marching across her imported hardwood floors. She stepped out of her master suite wearing designer silk pajamas, only to find stern-faced investigators swarming her sanctuary. The agents operated with swift, unyielding protocol. They secured the perimeter, confiscating Derek's personal electronics, his encrypted tablets, and the backup servers he desperately tried to hide in the basement behind boxes of expensive wine. Digital forensics teams cloned the routing data, mapping the exact pathways of the stolen oil capital. Meanwhile, a separate squad executed a simultaneous strike downtown at his former investment firm. They seized corporate hard drives and initiated immediate holds on every shadow portfolio tied to his name. The offshore accounts sitting in Caribbean tax havens were frozen shut by international warrant. The digital oxygen supply fueling his fraudulent empire vanished in a matter of seconds. While the federal agents dismantled his home, my own legal snare snapped shut. Silas had coordinated the delivery of our asset recovery notices to coincide perfectly with the government raid. 2 heavy-duty tow trucks arrived at the edge of Derek's driveway while the investigators cataloged the interior. The drivers possessed undeniable legal titles executed by my Delaware holding company. They chained the axles of Paige's pristine luxury sport utility vehicle and hoisted it onto the flatbed. She stood on the icy porch, shivering in the Arctic wind, shrieking at the tow truck drivers to stop. The federal agents simply watched, offering zero protection. She realized then that the extortion threat she levied in my office was entirely futile. The vehicle belonged to me, and I was taking it back. Simultaneously across town, the shockwave hit my parents. Victor and Valerie were enjoying a quiet morning at their upscale residence, preparing for a weekly country club luncheon. Their false sense of security was ruptured when a pair of stoic, plainclothes process servers bypassed their wrought iron gates. The servers handed my father a thick stack of unyielding legal documents. These were not civil complaints. They were federal subpoenas demanding their immediate appearance before a grand jury. The paperwork detailed their direct involvement in the fraudulent ecotourism shell company and the highly suspicious reverse mortgage executed on the Denali cabin. The pristine, untouchable reputation my family spent decades cultivating fractured beyond repair. The process servers did not operate in secret. Neighbors walking their purebred dogs watched the government vehicles idle in the driveway. The Anchorage elite feed on scandal, and the gossip spread through the high society networks faster than a forest fire. By noon, my parents were official pariahs. Their country club memberships were quietly suspended pending the outcome of the federal inquiry. The wealthy friends they fought so hard to impress stopped answering their calls, dodging the toxic fallout of a criminal indictment. They found themselves exiled in their own hometown. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my glass-walled corporate office watching the snow fall gently over the Cook Inlet. The compliance department had officially cleared my name the day prior, recognizing my proactive whistleblowing and the forged nature of the logistics contracts. My desk remained immaculate, clear of any lingering chaos. The warmth of the building contrasted sharply with the cold devastation raining down on my bloodline. My personal cell phone buzzed, breaking the serene quiet. The caller identification displayed my father's number. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the profound shift in leverage, before tapping the green icon to accept the call. "Melanie, you need to listen to me right now," Victor shouted, his voice a frantic, booming echo of a desperate man losing his grip on reality. His breathing was heavy, ragged with sheer panic. "The feds just showed up at our house. They raided your brother. They seized Paige's car right out of her driveway. They are freezing our retirement accounts. You need to wire us retainer fees today. We need the best defense attorneys in the state." I kept my posture relaxed, leaning back into my ergonomic leather chair. I did not speak, allowing his frantic demands to echo in the sterile room. I remembered how he toasted Derek at my promotion dinner, praising a thief while treating me like an invisible wallet. "Are you listening to me?" Victor demanded, his tone pitching higher. "This is a targeted witch hunt. Elias Thorne set us up. You have the capital from your new promotion. Transfer the funds to my secondary account immediately. Family protects family, Melanie. We have to circle the wagons and fight this together." His sheer delusion was genuinely fascinating. He stood amid the burning wreckage of his own crimes and still expected me to extinguish the flames using my own hard-earned resources. He attempted to invoke the very family loyalty he discarded the moment he forged my signature on a corporate loan. "You burned the family to protect a parasite," I replied, my voice an icy, steady blade slicing through his frantic hysteria. "You forged my name. You laundered stolen cash to buy country club status. Now the bill has come due." "Melanie, please," he stammered, the booming patriarch persona collapsing into a pathetic whimper. "We are your parents. We have zero liquid cash. The banks locked our cards. We cannot even buy groceries. You cannot just abandon us to the federal government." "You abandoned yourselves," I stated, feeling a profound, unshakable peace settle into my chest. "You made your choices, Victor. You are on your own." I moved the phone away from my ear, ending the call with a deliberate tap. I opened my contact settings and permanently blocked his number, along with Valerie's and Derek's. The final emotional tether snapping felt incredibly liberating. The antagonists were now effectively paralyzed. They wandered blindly through a labyrinth of federal regulations, stripped of their unearned wealth. Derek sat in a holding cell, answering questions from seasoned investigators who held irrefutable proof of his embezzlement. Paige barricaded herself in the remains of their raided home, surrounded by empty jewelry boxes and unpaid utility bills, realizing her pageant crowns offered zero defense against poverty. Victor and Valerie paced the floors of their estate, staring at subpoenas they could not afford to fight. They possessed no leverage, no allies, and no escape routes. Silas confirmed that our holding company had executed the asset levies, freezing whatever meager pennies remained in their checking accounts. The walls closed in tight, suffocating their grandiose ambitions, yet toxic narcissism rarely surrenders without a final dramatic spectacle. Cornered predators will always attempt one last desperate display of dominance before the trap finishes them off. The annual Anchorage Winter Solstice Gala was rapidly approaching. It served as the premier gathering for the Alaskan oil and ecotourism elite. Despite the crushing weight of impending indictments, my father's towering vanity refused to accept his new reality. He believed showing up to the gala, projecting an image of unbothered success, would somehow convince the federal authorities they had made a terrible mistake. He forced his fractured, ruined family to attend, scraping together the last remnants of their exhausted credit lines to secure their VIP tickets. They intended to walk into a ballroom filled with the most powerful executives in the state, pretending their empire was still intact. They planned to smile, sip champagne, and ignore the federal crosshairs aimed directly at their chests. They chose to step onto a highly visible, illuminated stage, unaware that I held the remote control to the entire production. The confrontation was set, and I was ready to bring the curtain down. The Anchorage Winter Solstice Gala was an event designed to separate the true titans of industry from the mere pretenders. Hosted at the Glacier Edge Resort, the venue demanded reverence. The ballroom featured towering floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the frozen inlet and the distant, jagged peaks of the Chugach Mountains. Inside the climate-controlled haven, the Alaskan elite gathered to celebrate the close of a highly lucrative fiscal year. Politicians, commercial fishing barons, and oil extraction executives mingled under enormous crystal chandeliers that resembled cascading icicles. Waiters in immaculate white jackets carried silver trays loaded with seared scallops, reindeer carpaccio, and vintage champagne. It was a sanctuary for the untouchable upper class. I arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, stepping out of my vehicle and handing the keys to the valet. I did not wear a subdued business suit tonight. I wore a tailored, floor-length sapphire silk gown that moved with fluid grace, hugging my frame like armor. The board of directors had not only reinstated my position, but formally elevated me to senior director of logistics, following my proactive role in uncovering the vendor fraud. I walked through the gilded doors, projecting unquestionable authority. The cool air of the lobby brushed past me, but I felt a distinct, fiery anticipation burning in my chest. I bypassed the crowded coat check and made my way toward the sweeping grand staircase that led to the VIP mezzanine. From that elevated vantage point, I possessed a perfect, unobstructed view of the sprawling party below. I ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime, resting my hands lightly on the polished brass railing. The orchestral music swelled, covering the low hum of corporate gossip. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the specific guests I knew would eventually arrive. Despite facing imminent federal indictments and catastrophic financial ruin, my father refused to hide. Victor possessed a towering narcissism that blinded him to his own demise. He firmly believed that projecting an aura of pristine prestige would somehow shield him from the encroaching legal storm. He had drained the very last remnants of an obscure secondary credit line just to purchase 4 premium admission tickets. He forced my mother, my brother, and my sister-in-law to attend the gala. They were instructed to smile, mingle, and pretend their empire was thriving. I spotted them entering the main hall. Victor led the procession, wearing a sharp tuxedo, his chin held high as he attempted to command the room. Valerie walked closely beside him, her face stretched into a tight, unnatural smile. Her eyes darted nervously, analyzing the subtle reactions of her former country club friends. She knew the rumors of the federal subpoenas were already circulating through the affluent crowds. Derek followed a few steps behind, looking less like a rising finance star and more like a condemned prisoner walking toward the gallows. His complexion was an unhealthy, chalky gray. He tugged at his silk tie, trying to loosen a collar that was not actually choking him. Paige trailed at the back of the group. She wore a stunning emerald green evening dress, and the custom $30,000 diamond teardrop necklace rested prominently against her collarbone. She clutched a small velvet purse, her knuckles pale. I knew precisely why she looked so terrified. She was wearing stolen jewelry that my holding company legally possessed. Furthermore, her personal bank accounts were tethered to Derek's frozen portfolio. Every step she took was a step on borrowed time. I watched Victor grab Derek by the elbow, steering his son directly toward a cluster of high-ranking oil executives standing near the towering ice sculptures. My father clapped one of the executives on the shoulder, forcing a loud, booming laugh. I could read his lips from the balcony. He was pitching Derek's upcoming independent ventures to men whose portfolios Derek had tried to drain just weeks prior. Victor operated under the delusion that securing a single lucrative consulting contract tonight might generate enough seed money to hire a formidable defense attorney. He was selling snake oil to sharks. Derek stood rigid beside his father, nodding mechanically. His gaze flickered frantically across the ballroom. He was desperately scanning the crowd for former clients. He spotted Elias Thorne standing near the premium bar, conversing with a local senator. Derek flinched, physically shrinking behind Victor's broad shoulders to avoid detection. The golden child was sweating profusely, a bead of moisture trailing down his temple and soaking into his starched white collar. He was trapped in a room filled with the very predators he had attempted to exploit. His tailored suit could not hide the trembling in his hands. Near the center of the hall, Paige separated from her mother-in-law and approached a secluded cocktail station. She ordered a top-shelf martini, attempting to soothe her frazzled nerves. The bartender handed her the drink and presented a small leather billfold. Paige opened her velvet clutch and produced a sleek metallic credit card. She handed it over, holding her breath. I watched her posture stiffen as the bartender swiped the card through the terminal. The machine emitted a sharp, negative beep. The bartender frowned, trying a second time. Another rejection beep echoed over the classical music. Paige's face flushed a deep, humiliating scarlet. She snatched the rejected card back, rummaging through her purse for a different piece of plastic. She handed over a secondary bank card, her hands shaking visibly. The bartender swiped it. Declined again. She was standing in the middle of the most elite gathering in Alaska, wearing thousands of dollars in stolen diamonds, and she could not even afford a $20 beverage. She shoved the useless cards back into her purse, abandoned the martini on the counter, and practically jogged toward the powder room to escape the judging stare of the bartender. Her facade was crumbling in real time. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. My father continued to shake hands, projecting hollow confidence, while the hull of his legacy filled with icy water. My brother dodged eye contact, suffocating under the weight of his impending prison sentence. My sister-in-law hid in a bathroom stall, terrified of her own poverty. They had built an existence entirely out of lies and stolen capital. Tonight, the bill was due. Silas approached me on the mezzanine. The corporate attorney wore a dark tailored suit holding a rocks glass filled with bourbon. He stood beside me looking down at the spectacular display of denial unfolding on the marble floor below. He checked his watch, noting the time with precision. "The federal marshals are positioned in the lobby," Silas murmured, his tone remarkably calm. "The event coordinators have given us clearance. The keynote speaker will finish his opening remarks in exactly 12 minutes. I kept my eyes fixed on my father. Victor was still smiling, holding a crystal flute of champagne, while spinning his fabricated tales of success. I reached into my clutch and felt the smooth surface of the secondary mobile device Silas had provided. It contained the secure digital link to the venue's master audiovisual system. We had paid a premium to intercept the main projection feed. The tension in the ballroom began to shift. The orchestral music faded out, replaced by a sharp drum roll from the stage. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. He requested the guests take their seats for the primary address. Hundreds of wealthy attendees began moving toward the lavishly decorated tables near the front of the hall. Victor directed our family to a prominent table right near the center aisle, ensuring they remained in the direct spotlight. I watched Derek slump into his chair, wiping his forehead with a linen napkin. Valerie reached over and squeezed his hand, offering a tight, unconvincing smile. Paige returned from the restroom, taking her seat with stiff, rigid movements, avoiding eye contact with everyone. They were surrounded by peers they desperately wished to impress. They wanted to belong to this world of untouchable prestige. They failed to realize the spotlight they craved was actually the crosshairs of a meticulously engineered execution. The keynote speaker, an influential oil extraction pioneer, walked up the steps to the stage. He adjusted his glasses, looking out over the sea of eager faces. Silas turned to me, offering a single, solemn nod. The pressure in the room felt dense, tangible, and electric. I unlocked the screen of the mobile device. My thumb hovered over the execution command. I was ready to bring the entire glorious illusion crashing down into the ice. The veteran oil extraction pioneer stepped up to the polished wooden podium. He adjusted his heavy silver glasses and offered a warm, practiced smile to the audience of 300 affluent guests. He cleared his throat, ready to deliver a speech celebrating a year of unprecedented fiscal growth in the Alaskan frontier. Behind him, the towering high-definition projection screens displayed the glowing corporate logo of the Glacier Edge Resort. The ballroom hummed with the quiet rustle of silk and the soft clinking of fine silver against porcelain plates. Down on the main floor, my father leaned forward in his chair, his chest puffed with pride, eager to associate himself with the impending celebration of wealth. Standing on the shadowy mezzanine, I looked down at the glowing mobile device in my hand. Silas gave me a single rigid nod. I pressed my thumb firmly against the execution command on the glass screen. The digital override transmitted instantly through the Venue Secure network. The transition was not subtle. The primary presentation software glitched, rendering the pristine corporate logo into a jagged mess of distorted pixels. A sharp, jarring burst of static hissed through the surround sound speakers, causing several guests in the front row to flinch and cover their ears. Then every single screen in the cavernous ballroom dropped into pitch darkness. The sudden absence of ambient light plunged the room into a heavy, suffocating silence. The keynote speaker tapped his microphone, but the audio feed was dead. A collective, confused gasp rippled through the crowd of politicians and industry leaders. The darkness lasted for exactly 4 seconds. It was just enough time for the confusion to peak before the true presentation began. The screens flashed back to life, emitting a brilliant, clinical white glare that washed over the upturned faces of the Alaskan elite. They did not see a restored corporate logo. They saw a meticulously engineered high-resolution flowchart detailing a staggering criminal enterprise. The diagram spanned 30 feet across the wall, outlining the exact flow of illicit capital. Crisp black lines connected my brother's former investment firm to a network of dummy corporations registered in Delaware. The routing numbers were displayed in pristine, undeniable clarity. The visual evidence did not stop with Derek. A secondary branch of the flowchart traced the laundered funds directly into a local holding account. The name of the entity hovered on the screen in bold text, unmasking my father's independent consulting business as a primary laundering hub. The diagrams displayed the exact dates and dollar amounts transferred, showcasing how stolen client money funded their country club dues and luxury vacations. To ensure the gravity of the situation was inescapable, I had programmed a stark warning to overlay the entire projection. A wide crimson banner materialized across the bottom third of the screens, reading, "Federal Asset Seizure Active," in stark block letters. The wealthy attendees stared at the projection, attempting to comprehend the staggering financial betrayal laid bare before them. Before anyone could formulate a defense, the audio-visual system hijacked the venue speakers. I triggered the audio file I had recorded in my office. Derek's strained, panicked voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers, bouncing against the marble walls with terrifying clarity. The entire ballroom listened as my brother threatened to fabricate compliance violations and destroy my career unless I funneled corporate funds into his shell company. He demanded money to pay his shadow lenders, openly confessing to the desperate, fragile state of his crumbling facade. The contrast between the polite, refined atmosphere of the gala and the raw, venomous extortion playing over the speakers was visceral. The reaction was instantaneous. The polite confusion mutated into raw financial terror. The high-ranking executives who had been shaking my father's hand just 10 minutes earlier realized they were standing next to the architects of a massive embezzlement ring. Elias Thorne, the man who fired Derek, sat near the front row, his face hardening into a mask of pure vindication. The investors seated at my family table physically recoiled. Men in bespoke tuxedos pushed their chairs backward, creating a wide, undeniable perimeter of isolation around Victor and Derek. They looked at my bloodline as if they carried a lethal contagion. Derek sat frozen, his eyes locked on the towering projection of his own ruin. The chalky gray pallor of his skin deepened, his chest heaved as he struggled to draw breath into his lungs. The golden child facade evaporated, leaving a hollow, terrified shell. He looked around the room, searching for an exit, but the trap was already sealed. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. 4 federal marshals stepped over the threshold, wearing dark tactical gear that starkly contrasted with the formal evening wear of the attendees. They moved with swift, unyielding purpose, navigating through the parted sea of stunned guests. The silver badges on their belts gleamed under the stage lights. Paige let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She scrambled backward, her chair tipping over and spilling her onto the floor. She clutched her velvet purse to her chest, hyperventilating as the marshals advanced. But the federal agents were not the only ones moving toward the ruined family. 2 senior executives from a prominent local bank stepped forward from the crowd. These were the men who managed the predatory loans I had secretly purchased through my holding company. Acting under the strict legal directives I provided, they approached the trembling former pageant queen. One of the bank executives extended his hand, looking down at Paige with cold, professional disdain. "Your accounts are frozen and your lines of credit are officially revoked," he stated, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Hand over the cards, Mrs. Stanton." Paige's hand shook as she unzipped her clutch. She surrendered the sleek plastic cards, stripping away her final illusion of elite status. The banker produced a pair of heavy steel scissors from his pocket. Right there in front of the most powerful people in Anchorage, he cut her credit cards into useless, jagged pieces, dropping the plastic shards onto the marble floor. Paige buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The $30,000 stolen diamond necklace around her throat looked like a heavy, suffocating shackle. The marshals reached the table. They grabbed Derek by the shoulders, hauling him to his feet. He offered zero resistance. His legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees in the center of the ballroom, the cold iron handcuffs clicking securely around his wrists. The defining sound of his incarceration echoed through the hall. Victor stood nearby, his face turning a deep mottled shade of purple. The patriarch, who had spent decades cultivating a flawless, untouchable reputation, was reduced to a humiliated bystander. He clenched his fists, his jaw trembling with impotent rage, but he remained entirely powerless to stop the federal execution. The wealthy friends he sought to impress watched his demise with silent, condemning judgment. I stood on the VIP balcony, gripping the brass railing. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I watched the architects of my lifelong conditioning face the brutal, unyielding consequences of their greed. The heavy, suffocating weight of my childhood dissolved entirely, replaced by the cold, immensely satisfying weight of total justice. The predators were finally caged, and I was the one who locked the door. The aftermath of the Anchorage Winter Solstice Gala moved with the cold, unyielding certainty of an Alaskan avalanche. There were no drawn-out trials or dramatic courtroom speeches. The digital evidence Silas and I submitted to the federal authorities left zero room for negotiation. Derek sat in a sterile holding cell, stripped of his tailored suits and his fabricated prestige. Faced with undeniable routing logs and the recorded extortion tape, my brother folded. He accepted a comprehensive plea deal for multiple counts of felony wire fraud and identity theft. The federal judge showed no leniency, handing down a strict 10-year sentence in a high-security penitentiary. The man who once scoffed at honest labor and mocked my logistics career found his new reality sharply redefined. The prison warden assigned him to the industrial laundry facility. The Golden Child now spends his days washing soiled jumpsuits for the very inmates he once deemed beneath him, his hands raw and blistered by harsh institutional bleach. Paige experienced a different kind of imprisonment. Her descent into poverty unfolded under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the public eye. When my holding company executed the final liens, her luxury sport utility vehicle was towed from the parking lot of a cheap discount grocery store. She stood in the freezing slush, holding plastic shopping bags, watching her final symbol of status disappear down the highway. The Anchorage elite permanently erased her from their social registries. Her former pageant friends blocked her number, refusing to associate with the wife of a convicted fraudster. Without access to Derek's stolen funds or my pristine credit, she faced severe destitution. She currently works grueling double shifts at a local diner, earning minimum wage to pay off the crushing restitution debts legally tethered to her name through their marriage certificate. The diamond teardrop necklace she flaunted is locked in a government evidence vault, and her vanity is buried under a mountain of unpaid bills. The most profound collapse belonged to the architects of my childhood conditioning. Victor and Valerie watched their untouchable legacy shatter into irrecoverable pieces. The toxic reverse mortgage they signed to bail out a thief reached its inevitable default. The regional bank moved with swift clinical precision, foreclosing on the sprawling Denali ecotourism cabin. Local sheriffs arrived on a bleak Tuesday morning, forcing my parents off the ancestral property. They packed their meager remaining possessions into cardboard boxes, stripped of their vintage wine collections and their country club memberships. They relocated to a cramped, drafty apartment situated on the industrial edge of the city, overlooking a loud commercial shipping yard. The pristine wilderness views they once bragged about were replaced by smog and rusted shipping containers. My blocked caller registry fills up every single week. They leave frantic, weeping voicemails from unlisted prepaid phones begging for forgiveness and pleading for a fraction of my corporate salary to pay their heating bills. They try to invoke the sacred bond of family, demanding salvation from the daughter they willingly sacrificed. I never listen to the recordings. I delete the audio files with a single swipe of my thumb. The toxic cord is severed, and I feel zero obligation to rescue the people who intentionally anchored weights to my ankles while I was swimming for my life. 6 months later, the bitter winter has surrendered to a crisp, bright Alaskan spring. I am standing on the expansive wooden deck of the Denali property, leaning against the hand-hewn cedar railing. When the bank listed this estate at public auction, they anticipated a fierce bidding war. Instead, my obfuscated Delaware holding company swooped in and acquired the deed for a staggering discount. I did not purchase the legacy cabin to preserve my father's memory or to salvage my bloodline. I bought the property to overwrite their history of greed with a foundation of undeniable purpose. The interior of the lodge no longer resembles a hollow shrine to unearned wealth. I ordered a total renovation, stripping the velvet curtains and the pretentious decor. The expansive living room now serves as a state-of-the-art corporate training center. I utilize my logistics budget and independent wealth to establish a rigorous academy for young, underprivileged women entering the Alaskan energy and technology sectors. We teach them complex routing algorithms, forensic data analysis, and advanced network security. We equip them with the exact digital tools required to build their own impenetrable fortresses. I walk through the halls, listening to the sharp hum of servers and the quiet, determined focus of women learning how to secure their own futures. It is a profound shift in energy, transforming a monument of narcissistic pride into a sanctuary of genuine empowerment. I hold a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the steam rise into the pristine mountain air. The colossal, jagged peaks of the glacier loom in the distance, towering over the deep green tree line. The ancient blue ice reflects the early morning sun, serving as a permanent reminder of endurance. The wilderness out here is unforgiving. It does not tolerate weakness, hesitation, or misplaced loyalty. The Alaskan frontier rewards only those who possess the strength to adapt and the clarity to see the terrain exactly as it is. For 3 decades, I allowed my family to dictate my worth. I accepted the role of the quiet, reliable shadow while they funded their glamorous illusions. But a severe betrayal provides a unique, unmatched clarity. It burns away the sentimental fog and reveals the stark, unyielding truth. Blood does not demand unconditional loyalty when that blood is laced with venom. Sharing a surname does not obligate you to act as a human shield for parasites who refuse to earn their own survival. When you strip away the frantic emotional manipulation and observe the world through a lens of pure data, the solutions become incredibly simple. You stop begging for validation from people who are fundamentally incapable of offering it. You stop setting yourself on fire to keep their illusions warm. Instead, you gather the raw, undeniable facts. You map the structural weaknesses of their deceit. You fortify your own position with airtight legal boundaries, and you let their own unchecked greed orchestrate their downfall. My parents and my brother believed my quiet nature was a symptom of vulnerability. They looked at my spreadsheets and saw a boring, compliant worker. They drastically underestimated the lethal precision required to dismantle a network of lies. I did not need to scream or break glass to secure my justice. I simply let the numbers do the talking. The math balanced out with flawless, unforgiving accuracy. I take a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing, pure air of the last frontier. The silence surrounding the cabin is deep and sustaining. It is the sound of total financial independence and unshakable personal peace. I own the ground beneath my boots. I command a thriving career built on my own unyielding merit. I possess an empire constructed from the ashes of their deceit. The ultimate retribution is not found in endless retaliation or bitter arguments. True justice is walking away from the wreckage, securing your own undeniable success, and knowing the people who tried to bury you are now forced to watch you rise from the very soil they poisoned. Never apologize for protecting your assets, and never negotiate with predators who see your integrity as an exploitable flaw. Build your fortress, secure your perimeter, and let the truth speak for itself. Looking out over the jagged ice-covered peaks of the Alaskan frontier, it is easy to understand the unforgiving nature of survival. The wilderness does not care about your pedigree or your social status. It does not coddle weakness or bend to entitlement. You either learn to navigate the terrain with skill, or the terrain swallows you whole. This stark reality mirrors the greatest, most devastating lesson hidden within the collapse of the Gomez family. Their spectacular ruin was not born in a single night of corporate sabotage or a dramatic ballroom confrontation. The seeds of their destruction were planted decades earlier, buried deep in the quiet, everyday choices made within the 4 walls of their childhood home. The tragedy of Derek, Victor, and Valerie serves as a profound cautionary tale about the true cost of imbalanced parenting. In traditional American culture, we often romanticize the concept of the protective family unit. We are taught that parents must act as an unfailing shield, buffering their children from the harsh consequences of the outside world. We celebrate the idea of providing our offspring with a life easier than the one we endured. There is, however, a razor-thin line between protecting a child and paralyzing them. When Victor and Valerie forced a 12-year-old girl to take the blame for her brother and his reckless snowmobile crash, they believed they were preserving his bright future. In truth, they were handing him the very shovel he would use to dig his own grave. True parental love is inextricably linked to honesty and accountability. Raising a child to understand fairness requires the courage to let them fail. When a family artificially inflates one child, crowning them the golden heir, while demanding the other act as a silent, compliant beast of burden, they distort the emotional ecosystem of the entire household. Derek grew into a man who believed his mistakes would always be erased by someone else and their sacrifice. He never developed the internal resilience required to navigate failure. So when he finally faced a genuine crisis, his only instinct was to steal, lie, and extort. He became a parasite because his parents spent his entire life serving as his willing hosts, feeding his vanity rather than shaping his character. On the other side of that distorted coin stood Melanie. Denied the warmth of unconditional support, she learned to view affection as a transactional currency she could never quite earn. The emotional awareness required to foster a healthy, connected family was entirely absent in her home. Instead of a sanctuary filled with candid conversations and mutual respect, her parents constructed a hollow theater of status. They valued the appearance of a successful son over the genuine, hard-earned character of their daughter. This profound lack of emotional intelligence within the family structure forced Melanie to suppress her vulnerability and replace it with a cold, forensic detachment. She survived the familial frostbite, building an armor of undeniable competence, but survival of that magnitude always exacts a heavy toll on the soul. The American ideal champions the self-reliant, ethical individual who builds a legacy through grit and fair play. Yet the shadows of many affluent traditional families hide a starkly different reality, where maintaining a pristine country club facade is prized above nurturing moral integrity. Victor and Valerie liquidated their entire retirement, signing away a multi-million-dollar ecotourism cabin, not out of love, but out of a desperate, suffocating vanity. They could not bear the social humiliation of a flawed son. By attempting to purchase his salvation with unearned bailouts, they engineered their own destitution. They failed to realize that when you teach a child that the rules of society do not apply to them, you are writing a script that inevitably ends in tragedy. Guiding children toward a sustainable, honorable future demands much more than funding their college tuition or buying them luxury vehicles. It demands the grueling, often uncomfortable work of instilling a firm moral compass. It requires parents to look their children in the eye and say, "You broke this, and you will clean it up." Emotional awareness in parenting means recognizing that a child and their temporary discomfort in facing consequences is the very forge that tempers their character. If you deprive them of that forge, you send them out into a severe, unforgiving world armed with nothing but paper shields and unwarranted arrogance. They will crumble at the first sign of real pressure, dragging everyone who tethered themselves to their sinking ship down into the icy depths. We often watch stories of betrayal and spectacular justice, cheering when the architect of a fraud meets their inevitable downfall. We feel the deep, resonant satisfaction of seeing the scales finally balance out. If you find yourself drawn to these narratives of resilience, if you have ever had to build your own fortress after the people who should have protected you chose to walk away, I invite you to join our community. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow Grape Echo Stories. Share your journey in the comments below and connect with others who understand the profound strength required to rewrite a broken family legacy. Your stories of survival are the exact fuel that keeps this channel thriving. As we dissect the wreckage of families torn apart by greed and favoritism, we are forced to confront a deeply unsettling reflection of our own lives. We look at our own dining room tables and must ask ourselves what kind of foundation we are pouring for the next generation. Are we building homes anchored in unvarnished truth, holding our loved ones accountable for their actions? Or are we constructing fragile glass castles held together by dark secrets and foolish pride? Society conditions us from birth to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred covenant that requires endless forgiveness and infinite second chances. We are instructed to honor our parents and protect our siblings, regardless of the emotional or financial cost to our own well-being. We are told that turning your back on your bloodline is the ultimate moral failure. Perhaps this conventional wisdom is the very trap that keeps so many good people locked in endless cycles of silent suffering. The most vital, definitive truth of family dynamics defies this comforting cliché. Blood is merely a biological coincidence. It is not a binding contract for indentured servitude. Loyalty, respect, and love must be actively earned every single day, not blindly inherited and weaponized. Sometimes the highest form of love a parent can offer is allowing their child to fall hard against the unforgiving concrete of reality. And sometimes the most profound act of self-preservation a person can commit is to stop catching the people who keep choosing to jump. You do not owe your warmth to those who only view you as firewood. Let the cold wind blow through the broken branches and build your fire somewhere else.